picture this. You're inside, fire crackling nearby, and outside it's letting loose. Storm's booming. You look up, maybe catch a flash of lightning through the window, and you think, what's it all about? That right there, that's what Ricardo Calvario's Stardust is all about, that deep down need to figure out our place in all this vastness.
It's a question as old as time, isn't it? Calvario argues that this drive, this urge to understand the universe, it's as primal as our need to eat or find shelter. It's about finding our place in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, and he says for the longest time, we humans have been stuck trying to make sense of it all with, well, limited tools. It's like trying to solve a puzzle, but we're missing half the pieces.
We're limited by our senses. Take the electromagnetic spectrum. We humans, we only see a tiny sliver of it as visible light. But there are animals out there experiencing a whole different reality.
So we're walking around with blinders on, basically. Oblivious to a whole other world of sensory information. Makes you wonder what we're missing.
Exactly. Imagine being an eagle, seeing ultraviolet light, tracking prey with unbelievable precision. Or a bat, using echolocation to navigate in total darkness, essentially, they see with sound waves. Calvario, he says these limitations, this inability to experience so much of what's out there, it shaped our ancestors big time.
So they turned to rituals, symbolism, this idea of a spirit world to try to fill in the gaps.
Exactly. They looked for answers in what they couldn't see. Use their imagination, their intuition, to wrestle with these mysteries of existence. And this leads to one of Calvario's most interesting ideas, the template.
The template? Okay, gotta admit, that one threw me for a loop. Sounds like something out of the Matrix, you know?
It's a powerful metaphor. Think of your body as your avatar, right, in this game of life, controlled by the game's mechanics, biology, physics, the whole shebang. But your consciousness, the you part, that might exist on a whole other level, like the player behind the screen.
So our bodies are like finely tuned machines, but our consciousness, that's something more. Something that could be outside the normal bounds of space and time even.
That's the core of Calvario's argument. He suggests our consciousness could be connected to something much bigger, a field of awareness that goes way beyond our everyday perception.
It's amazing though, right? How much we've learned about the universe, even about how our own brains work. But Calvario, he throws us a bit of a curveball here. He asks, have we gotten so caught up in our scientific models that we've, I don't know, stopped questioning them enough, like fallen into this trap of, what's it called, scientific dogma?
Yeah, it's a good point. He uses the example of this guy, Immanuel Velikovsky, a scholar who, back in the mid-20th century, really challenged the scientific establishment. Velikovsky, he had these radical theories about ancient celestial events and the scientific community at the time. Let's just say they weren't too thrilled.
Wait, so this Velikovsky, he was actually onto something. Now you gotta tell me more about that.
His ideas were definitely out there, yeah. But here's the interesting thing. Years later, some of Velikovsky's predictions, the ones that got him practically laughed out of the room, turns out new discoveries ended up supporting some of them. It's a good reminder that even when we think we have it all figured out, there's always a chance, a new piece of evidence, a different way of looking at things that can come along and completely change our understanding.
Makes you feel kind of small, doesn't it? Thinking that even in science, we can get stuck on these ideas, even if they're not quite right, or maybe even totally wrong.
It shows how important it is to keep an open mind, to keep asking questions, keep refining what we know. Calvario uses the example of gravity, something we don't even think twice about. But even our understanding of that, it's changed so much over time.
You mean like gravity, as in what keeps us from floating away, that gravity, that's changed?
Absolutely. Think about Aristotle. His ideas on gravity, they were the standard for centuries, right? He believed objects sought their natural place, which is why things fell down. We know now that's not quite it, but it just shows how our view of the universe is always evolving.
And then there was Galileo, right? With his telescope challenging the idea that everything revolved around Earth.
Exactly. Galileo's observations, seeing those moons orbiting Jupiter, that was huge. It chipped away at this idea that we were the center of everything. And his experiments, dropping objects and all that challenged this belief that heavier objects fall faster.
Yeah.
Which people had just, accepted for ages.
Well, Galileo really shook things up, huh? Paved the way for a new understanding of gravity.
And then Newton comes along, right? He gives us the math, this law of universal gravitation explaining why planets move the way they do, why that apple falls from the tree. But even Newton's work, as groundbreaking as it was, wouldn't be the end of the story.
And then, bam, Einstein, right? Relativity, completely blew up everything we thought we knew about gravity.
Right. Einstein showed us that gravity, it wasn't just this force between objects. It's a warp in space-time itself,
Yeah.
caused by mass and energy. A completely different way of looking at, well, everything.
And here's where it gets really trippy, and where I think Calvario makes this really cool connection. Even Einstein's theories, which were mind-blowing in their own right, seem to suggest that there might be, I don't know, more to the story, something beyond just the physical stuff.
You got it. When we try to use Einstein's equations to understand the very, very beginning, the Big Bang, they sort of break down. It's like they're pointing towards something, a starting point that they can't quite explain.
Like science keeps running into this wall, this edge, where our current theories just, I don't know, stop working. Like there's something else there, something we're not quite grasping yet.
And that's where Calvario's exploration of consciousness comes in. He suggests that the key to understanding these big mysteries of the universe, it might lie in understanding our own awareness.
Okay, so we've talked about how our senses can only take in so much, how even scientists can get stuck on outdated ideas, and this wild idea that maybe, just maybe, there's way more to the universe than we can even grasp right now. But where does consciousness fit into all of this? If our bodies are like super advanced machines, where's the me in all of it?
That is the question, isn't it? The one philosopher, scientists, everyone's been wrestling with forever. Like you could take apart a computer, right? See all the wires, the chips, everything, but you wouldn't find the person typing on the keyboard, would you? Calvario says maybe we're making the same mistake, trying to find consciousness just in the physical stuff of the brain.
So instead of just neurons firing, Calvario wants us to think about consciousness working on a whole other level.
Exactly. He's got this idea of a morphic field, this field of information, but it's beyond our physical reality. And this field, that's where he thinks the key to understanding consciousness might be.
Morphic field, huh? Okay, I gotta be honest, that one's a little out there, even for me. Is there like a way to picture how this morphic field thing would even work?
Think about this.
Huh.
Ever walk into a room and you could just feel it, right? Like a certain energy, good or bad, almost like the air itself is, I don't know, charged with something you can't quite put your finger on. Calvario thinks that might be us tapping into the morphic field, this hidden network connecting us all.
Like we're all swimming in this sea of information, this morphic field, and our brains are picking up on certain frequencies, like radios.
Perfect analogy. Our brains, in this idea, they aren't so much making consciousness, but receiving it, tuning into this bigger field of awareness.
But what about all the research, right? The stuff that shows how brain activity is linked to our thoughts, our emotions, all of it. Are you saying that's wrong?
No, not at all. Calvario, he gets how amazing all those discoveries are, but he sees them as like part of the picture, not the whole thing. The brain, maybe it's like a really complex instrument, right? But the music itself, the consciousness, that might be coming from somewhere else entirely, from this morphic field.
Okay, so our brains are like radios picking up signals from this massive, invisible network of consciousness. It's a lot to wrap your head around. But how do you even study something like that? It's not like we can cut open a morphic field in a lab.
That's where Calvario says we got to look at the things that really challenge how we see reality, things like, well, psychedelics.
You're talking about going all the way back to shamans and ancient wisdom, huh?
Kind of, yeah. Throughout history, people have used these substances to get to these altered states of consciousness to connect with what they see as spiritual realms. And Calvario, he thinks those experiences, even though science often dismisses them, they might be glimpses into this larger reality, this morphic field.
So maybe those substances, they're like temporarily changing our brain's radio dial, letting us tune into those frequencies we're normally closed off from.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And while scientists are still figuring out how consciousness works, you've got integrated information theory, global workspace theory, all sorts of ideas. Calvario's work, it pushes us to think bigger, to consider that maybe the answer to this whole mystery of consciousness, it lies somewhere we haven't even imagined yet.
So we end on more questions than answers, but maybe that's the point, right? By digging into these huge questions, by being willing to admit what we don't know, it opens us up.
Yep.
New possibilities to understanding ourselves and this crazy universe we're a part of in ways we never thought possible.
And maybe, just maybe, like Calvario suggests, the deeper we go into our own consciousness, the more we might actually be shaping that vast network, that morphic field, in ways we're just starting to grasp. If it's true what they say, as above, so below, then what does our own awareness mean for everything else out there? That's something to think about, isn't it?